All right, I think we'll get started now unless anyone has an objection. No? All right. Hi, my name is Michael Crowe. So I'm doing this talk today about questionnaire design, and I've got some questions to ask you people as well out there. So some of it responsive would be nice, but some of it is if you just think about it yourself. So just a little bit about myself. When I finished doing a degree in marketing and then I did a master's in IT, I started working in survey research that also involved questionnaire design. And I've taught research methods and stats and survey research subjects, amongst other things, over time as well. I went on and did my PhD in assessing the quality of health research, which I developed the Crowe Critical Appraisal tool for that. And then, because I'm an absolute glutton for punishment, I went on and did a master's in biostats because I figured out from my PhD that I didn't know enough about stats. So all of this comes together in a sort of general background in sort of research methods and stats. So today, what we're just going to look at is questionnaire design. Now, I'm specifically keeping this kind of a narrow focus on questionnaire design rather than looking at lots of things around questionnaires like measurements. So if I don't cover things that you'd like to hear about, just let me know and we might be able to do a talk about them at another time. So today is just putting a general structure on questionnaire design rather than necessarily getting into some of the nitty-gritty about wording, but we sort of cover some of that as well. So for you thinking about questionnaires, I assume most of you will have filled out some sort of a questionnaire at some stage. And I imagine many of you have had bugs or just frustrations in filling out questionnaires. And you could probably give me some examples of bad questions or bad questionnaires that you've filled out. There is lots of them. But there's also some good questionnaires and good ways of developing questionnaires to try and get good responses from people. So just with the definition to start with, so a questionnaire is simply a set of questions that is used to collect information. And you see that with just, just general finding people's just basic demographic information, as well as more complex questionnaires as well, trying to find out more and more information about people. The principles then of questionnaire design are, there's sort of 6 steps-ish in how to do this. Sorry, my mouse skips around every now and again and it switches screens on me. Anyway, I'll be going through these principles, so respondents and objectives and types of questionnaires and how to develop questions and responses, questionnaire layout, and some information about pre-testing. And at the very end, there's just some references for if you want more information as well. Right, so before we begin though, this came from doing my own survey designs, is a little question for you. I'm not going to read it out, but were you thinking with that question that the answer would be somewhere along the lines of never married, married, divorced, separated, widowed, or whatever? And most people would think that that's the correct answer to it. But if you were reading it a little bit more closely, your answers might be something along the lines of, maybe I'm current, retired, in the reserves, or a ninja, because the question is actually saying, what is your marital status, and not what is your marital status. And when I was helping design a questionnaire a long time ago, it was only before it went for its final draft that we figured out, someone spotted that we had asked the question, what is your marital status, instead of what's your marital status. So bugs just get into questionnaires at the most inopportune of times. And it is about being open to that fact that, you know, we're all human. And so instead of going through some of these things in order, if you've got, like me, sort of a short attention span, if there's nothing else to remember, it's not to skip the pre-testing stage at the very end, because most people go, oh, yeah, last step, we'll just, you know, push through that, everything will be okay. But really, every questionnaire that is ever developed has mistakes in it. And usually the way to get rid of some of these mistakes is to do lots and lots of drafts and to test your questionnaire. So when you've done lots of drafts and you think it's good enough, you give it to someone who hasn't been involved in the questionnaire, and you ask them to fill it in, and you ask them how they went. And they will give you lots and lots of ideas of things that you may be able to do better. And then you redraft it, you ask more people, redraft it. But at some stage, you actually need to test your questionnaire with the population that is supposed to be the recipient of the questionnaire. And when you get some people to do that, you can then ask them in person, preferably for their thoughts, feedback, what observations they have, what problems they've seen with the questionnaire. And then you can do another redraft, and then you can go back again and have an even better version of the questionnaire. There is some research and some reasoning around that. Some questionnaires need piloting as well, and that's just taking a small section of the population that you want to deliver the questionnaire to and getting them to fill it out under normal conditions, and then seeing what sort of answers you get back and whether people have had problems with the questionnaire. If you do need to go to the piloting stage, there are some decisions to be made on how many people are involved in that pilot. Again, I'm not going to go into that sort of thing today, but there are some decisions around that as well. So really don't skip the pre-testing, whatever else you do. So with the principles of questionnaire design, it's like a pyramid. So building from the bottom up, the first thing you need to think about are the respondents, or who's going to be filling out this questionnaire. On top of that, you build what are your objectives from the questionnaire. And then based on those two things, you build up the type of questionnaire you're having, the layout, the questions, the responses. So it's a bit of a layered approach to this. When you're looking at respondents, the most important thing that you need to do is to put yourself in the same sort of mindset as potential respondents, to see the world from their perspectives. So you have to take away all the values, assumptions, and jargon that you normally use and think of things from a respondent's point of view. In that way, you also want to ask the respondents questions that they can answer and also answer truthfully. So you have to keep in mind, do respondents have the knowledge to answer the questions that you're asking? And that's where filter questions come in good at the start of a questionnaire, to try and take away the people who don't know what you're going on about, and so you're not really wasting their time. The second thing you have to think about is, will respondents be able to remember the information you're looking for? So a questionnaire that I've been dealing with recently has been asking people about things they did in the last month. And a month is actually a really, really long time. And most people won't remember what they've been doing over a month. So having appropriate timeframes is important. The last thing then you have to think about is, with respondents, is are they, or do they have the ability to express an answer? And so you're looking at things like language skills, their reading comprehension, writing skills, depending on the type of questionnaire. So it is important to keep that in mind. And the other thing is to remember is that if you've ever filled out a questionnaire, you'll realize that you're pretty impatient with them. And so as a respondent, you've got limited time, you've limited motivation, you don't have an awful lot of patience to fill things in. And so as a respondent, then you just want to get it over with, and you want to spend as little sort of mental energy in it on the questionnaire as possible. So you have to keep that in mind developing your questionnaire, and also that the questions you're asking, that they're legitimate and relevant based on what you're trying to find out. If respondents think that questions aren't legitimate or relevant, you'll get either those questions won't be responded to, or what happens is respondents will fill in a certain amount of the questionnaire and then just abandon it. They'll just not do the rest of it because they believe that the questions aren't appropriate for what they were told. So you get all sorts of problems around that. What I usually tell people is when they're developing questionnaire is to just keep in mind that your typical respondent is a distracted 12-year-old. Basically, or even a 10-year-old. So what you're thinking of is, right, so to get things really, really simple, you're using plain, simple, unambiguous words. You repeat instructions so that people remember them. So instructions on the questionnaire or bunches of questions or particular questions. You make sure that all your questions are both easy to understand and easy to respond to. A lot of where people forget is that the responses that you provide are just as important as the questions. What you should try and do is to avoid open-ended or unstructured questions. These are the sort of boxes you get on questionnaires that ask you to fill in bits of information. But if you're that sort of distracted 12-year-old, the first thing you'll think is, I don't really want to do that because it means that I have to think about it. And so you'll skip over those ones. And the other one is not to have too many questions or too many choices in the questions, because what ends up happening then for respondents is they'll basically end up ticking patterns of boxes because it's boring and they're just trying to get the questionnaire finished. So you're just getting data back that's not really or necessarily relevant for what you're trying to find out. With your objectives, then, you do actually have to have objectives for your questionnaire. So you're looking at what information is required and why it's required. If this is for research you're doing, then it would be based around your research objectives. But if it's not, it's based around what information you actually need. So it's not nice to know stuff, it's what you actually really need to know. So, and that's why when I get people designing questionnaires, I get you to write down what is the objective beside each question that is been answered or is contributing to an objective, so that you keep a track of exactly what you're trying to do. One thing you need to know in your objectives as well is whether you're just designing a simple or relatively simple information type questionnaire, or are you developing more of a measurement instrument? And this is where you're trying to maybe use questionnaires to like the ones used to diagnose certain illnesses or whatever, and they take an awful lot more effort and require validity and reliability testing before they can be used. And again, that's not something I'm going to get into today. That's the whole area of psychometrics, which is really important and very, well, I think it's very interesting at least. So you kind of have to take that into account as well. If you are going to that level of questionnaire design, there's just lots of steps that have to be done. There is some research on questionnaire designs that say that validity and reliability testing is required. That's especially true if you're going to do very large types of questionnaires to large populations of people. It tends to be recommended to do some sort of testing around validity and reliability as well, because you want to get as accurate a return as possible. Okay, so types of questionnaire then. Another definition of questionnaires is that it's a highly structured interview. So it's like, just an interview, but very, very structured, because in general with questionnaires, you can't change the questions or explain the questions to people, that all the information needed should be within the questionnaire itself. So different types then of ways of distributing your questionnaires by telephone, though that has really dropped off because of scam calls. Then there's huge non-response. It's still used for things like opinion surveys, who would you vote for if there was a general election tomorrow? But they still get problems with huge non-responses in those types of questionnaires as well. An awful lot of questionnaires, at least, are self-administered, whether it's online or mail. Not that there's many mail questionnaires anymore, because again, there's a lot of non-response there. But if you're doing online questionnaires, again, you have to have the detailed instructions, simple questions and responses. But one of the good things about online is you can use branching. So if a person says yes or no to a particular question, you can branch them off and get them to answer different questions as a result of a previous question. And lastly, there's in-person questionnaires, so they're administered by someone else. And usually you can ask longer and more complex questions if it's in person. And you can also use prompts or answer cards or prompt cards for people as well. But again, that also depends on context, because if you're bringing your family to McDonald's, for example, you're not really going to take on board an in-person questionnaire with someone sitting there with you and your family asking long and complex questions, because, hey, why would you bother? You're not really in that mind space. Looking at questions and responses then, you have to base, obviously, your questions and responses on your respondents and your objectives. And included in this as well is all the instructions that you need to pass on to respondents about questions, about the different questions, and the potential responses. Okay. So one of the things I get asked a bit as well is, should I use existing questionnaires or questions? And the answer to that is a big yes. If someone has already gone through the problems and the effort of developing questions that look really, really good with really good responses, then you should use those. Again, generally in using other people's questions, there is also thoughts around the validity and reliability of those questions or questionnaires as well. But again, for another time, because it's a bit more difficult. And just that in general, questionnaire designers will both copy and steal from wherever they can. So you do that. Like even when I'm dealing with students developing questionnaires, I say, look, yes, you're not supposed to copy things. You're not supposed to directly use word for word everything that's been used, because plagiarism and everything. But the reality is that there's so much effort in developing good questionnaires that it is a good idea to steal where you can. You can, if it's for academic purposes, you can always state where you got the information from as well. When you're looking at questions and responses, there's two things. One is the measurement and structure of the questions, and the second one is the wording of those questions and responses as well. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly through this stuff because there's lots of resources out there on how to do this. But the easiest question is a dichotomous question, which is a yes, no, or agree, disagree type question. A lot of times those questions also have a no or don't know, sorry, I don't know, no opinion, not applicable, all of those sort of answers. It's still dichotomous because you're really looking for that yes, no answer rather than the I don't know answer. They're just pretty simple and straightforward, easy to answer, easy to analyze. They're good for filtering people out that don't have the information. So you can say, thanks very much for participating, but we're looking for people with other knowledge or reasons. The problem with dichotomous type questions is there's very, very little information from them. And one of the things that comes up in the literature is that these type of questions are also susceptible to wording influence, which I always find a bit weird because all questions that you ask are susceptible to wording influence. So it's something that needs to be considered. Multiple choice questions. These are just your normal, if you've done any sort of multiple choice or where you just choose one answer from different ones. So where was your last sports injury? Please select one injury only is normally what the question would be, something along those lines. Again, I know it seems obvious, but you do actually have to tell your respondents to check to select only one answer, especially if this is a paper questionnaire, because the ability is there to choose more than one. Online, it's not a big issue because you're only able to choose one. By the way, there is a problem with the responses in this question, and we'll talk about that later on. You can get bias depending on your multiple choice in the positioning or the order of the responses. And that's something that needs to be considered as well to have a look at that. Again, that's getting more into the weeds of it. So, whoops, it just zoomed in there. Next type are multiple answers. So you can select all the injuries. So what sports injuries have you had in the last 6 months? So you could select all the ones that apply. Just as a question for everyone out there, if anyone wants to respond, what's with the other category there? And please specify, what are you hoping goes in there? And what is most likely to go in there? Does anyone have an idea? No one wants to volunteer. That's okay. What you're actually hoping for in the other response is that it's blank, that you've put enough options before it and the correct options before it. What you will actually find is that what most often goes into the other category is something that you've already listed. So someone will take other and then go, oh, I injured my leg. And they'll type that in if it's online. And it's like, well, why didn't you just tick leg? But that's usually what happens with other responses as a norm, unfortunately. Another type is a ranking scale. So we're going into more complex questions now with scales. A ranking scale asks things like, given your recent sports injuries, do the severity from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most severe injury to 5 being the least of them. Again, you get a lot of response error in this, especially if it's written, in that people give the same ranking to multiple things. Analog scales, so the one used for pain to put your visual analog scale of pain shouldn't really be used. It's better to use a discrete scale from 0 to 10, or some of you may have come across the FACES pain rating scale as well. So they're all visual ones. Adjectival scales then are ones where there's a question around, for me, or to give an opinion on things, or to ask just general questions from people. So with different adjectives across the top. So the first one there is from most pleasant to most unpleasant, from very important to very unimportant, from strongly agree to strongly disagree, or vice versa. Overall ratings that you'd say things are excellent to poor. And there's lots of theories about how many responses you should have here. Usually it's somewhere between 4 and 7. Normally, again, if you expect that your respondents are going to sort of hedge their bets, which can happen a lot, you wouldn't have a neutral point. So that would mean you'd have an even number of possible answers. So that's the Twitter one. If you think that most people are just going to go meh, average, or, you know, I neither agree nor disagree, you'd have just those 4 points to force people to be on the negative or positive side. If it doesn't matter, you can put in one. And often you'll have with number 4 there, like overall I rate the question, you might have these don't know or not applicable type answers as well, just so that people have that choice, that they really don't have an opinion at all. The Likert scale then is another one. This is quite like the adjectival scale, except it's always from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and there's always a neutral. So you have to have at least 5 responses, and sometimes 7. 5 is the most common, by the way, really. The other thing that people get wrong with the Likert scale is that all the questions within a scale need to be about the same thing. So all these questions relate to work, or a person and their thoughts about work, for example. So I feel good about my time at work, I get along with others at work. And that's because that in theory with a Likert scale, you can get the average answer overall, so that you would have sort of the individual answers, responses given by respondents, plus a sort of overall average answer for all of the ones above. So sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, depending on the responses that are available for people. So the second part of questions and responses is the wording. And in order to do that, you have to define what is the concept or what is the question you're looking for, which seems easy, but sometimes it's actually a bit more difficult. Again, your wording for both questions and responses needs to be plain, simple, unambiguous, conversational style. You know, you're dealing with normal everyday people in a rush, trying to fit things, trying to get these things done. So you try to be as straightforward and conversational as possible. And there's always the avoid ones. You don't want leading or biased questions, and I'm going to have examples of these as we go along. You don't want to imply that there's alternatives or just give one alternative that you only want people to answer. You don't want people to make generalizations. You want them to actually answer specific questions. You can't assume that people have knowledge. You have to let people know what they're answering the questions are. And the usual ones, there's double-barreled questions and questions which the responses are only covering part of the totality of things that could be answered, or there's overlapping responses, so it makes things harder for people. I don't really get too caught up in these definitions. When you're developing your own questionnaires, it's really about figuring out, can the respondent answer this question? Is it in a way that can be answered, as opposed to being able to define whether it's a leading or biased question, or it's a generalization or assumed knowledge. So going back to my earlier question about why are the responses not very good for this, was your last sports injury, choose one only, was it head, neck, back, arm, leg, or other? Why is that not a particularly good example? Does anyone want to have a go?
From a physio point of view, there's not detail in the answers.
Yep.
So what part of the head, what part of the neck, left, right. Yeah, there's a lot you can do.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, there's a lot there. So it's not very specific. And if this was for physio or for that end of things, it's really not good enough. If it's just a general trying to find information, it's still not quite good enough. So to improve it, you'd actually need to give lots of options there. So maybe head or neck, back, shoulder, hip, arm, including the elbow, wrist, hand, knee, leg, whatever. So you would have to really think about exactly what stuff you need to put in there. And to be a bit clearer for the respondent about what you're looking for. There's the couple of people have come up with there's no left or right. What happens if you've more than one injury, even though it was your last sports injury, you might have hurt more than one area. So I know, yes, and it's also asking about injuries, but so the question wasn't great. It should ask, well, it's asking where was your last sports injury. So it's a bit ambiguous as a question as well, because you could think in the back of your mind, well, it was on the playing field over beyond wherever, it was where I got injured rather than your body part as such. So lots of different reasons, but they were there as an example. So here's some more, just getting into some of them. So responses are, I'm happy to get them for these ones. So here's a wording for a question that might be asked by someone. Anyone got any thoughts on that one?
Physio knows what that is.
Yeah, so what's the context? There's a huge language issue there. Thanks for the responses, people. It was good. Yeah, it's all jargonese. And what's with this 66 hours? Like, holy crap. Who knows what happened? When was 66 hours ago? But often, you're asked, what happened in the last 24, 48, 72, 96 hours? And it's like, well, do you really know these things? Why don't you say, did it happen in the last day, 2 days, 3 days? Do you really need to know things down to the to an hour? And why don't you say, it's actually with a question like this, which is kind of complex, you'd actually break it down. So have you had a cough in the last, 66 hours is actually almost 3 days. So have you had a cough in the last 3 days? What type of cough? How would you describe that cough? And then you can give types of responses to that. So you'd actually break that down into a series of smaller questions to make it easier for someone to answer. Next one, do you like the atmosphere and service quality? Of what? Yeah, well, there is that. It's, I don't know if it's vague. Maybe it is. The big one here is that it's actually, yep, Meryl got it. It's actually 2 questions. Do you like the atmosphere? Yes, no, or maybe some other ones. And do you like the service delivery? Or so say this was, you were at a cafe or something. It's 2 different things. What happens if you like the atmosphere but didn't like the service delivery? Or what happens if you like the service delivery but the atmosphere was really bad? So again, it's what's called a double barrel question, and you need to split it into 2 different questions. What pain relief did you use? Nurofen, Panadol? Yep. So yeah, so lots of people got that one. So basically, that's two brands of pain relief, and it used to be quite simple because Nurofen only had one drug and Panadol only had another drug. But now both brands actually Panadol produce both paracetamol and ibuprofen or ibuprofen, depending on where you come from. And Nurofen do the same. They have an ibuprofen and a paracetamol type drug now. So it becomes difficult with actual drugs because of the brand name, which is what respondents might probably know, whereas the generic name they may not. So it really depends on who your respondents are. And also there's lots of other brands out there, or you might not have used any pain relief whatsoever. So there should be a neither, or there should be an other in there as well. All right, next one. So where did you grow up? Country, farm, city? Yep, it's limited. Yes, you could have spent time in all of them. Hey, what about the beach? Yes, that would be nicer all together. Limited options, but not only, this is a good one because not only are there partial responses there in that it doesn't cover every possibility, there's also overlapping ones. So you could have grown up in a farm in the country, but there is some city farms as well. They're few and far between now, but you can actually have what are called city farms. Um, and it's also ambiguous, like grow up. Are you talking, until I was, 10, or are you talking all until I was in my teens, or are you talking about until I left home, or how do you define where did I grow up? So again, there's all sorts of problems, even though it seems like a reasonable question, even the question actually is a bit ambiguous too, and the responses just really aren't good enough. Next one. Wouldn't you agree that healthcare workers do a heroic job? Yes, it's just a little bit leading. But is there someone going to answer no to that? Really? You'd imagine that everyone is going to answer yes to it. Well, you'd hope so anyway, I think. What do you know about SARS? A couple of problems with this one as well. Yeah, it's an acronym, and you should never, ever use acronyms unless you also give the exact meaning of what that acronym is. SARS, for those of you who think that it's severe acute respiratory system or syndrome, you're all wrong. SARS is a soft drink available in the US, tastes of sarsaparilla, so you've got to be careful. What should be done about murderous terrorists who threaten the freedom and safety of law-abiding citizens? Again, it's like the one about healthcare workers. It's both leading, biased. You're looking for a particular answer, so it's not really good. It very emotive for those asking as well. You do not, you try to not, you try to not, you try to keep your questions quite neutral in general, because you want people to make their own decisions. All right, some other wording ones. Yeah, confusing to say the least. You've also got double negatives in there, which people find very difficult to deal with. It's just, that one's a nightmare. Next one. Yeah, there's an assumption in there. Yeah, so most respondents would be reluctant to disagree with a health professional. Whether they did or not, it doesn't matter. So someone might think that smoking doesn't cause lung disease, but it comes up in a questionnaire and it's stated like that, and people would agree with it, not because they agree with it, but because they think that you want them to agree with it. So you get all sorts of weird things happening. What's your opinion on the Centrelink changes the government is currently discussing? Yeah, so again, you need more information. So what Centrelink changes? Which government? So before you'd ask a question like that in general, you would actually have to have a little paragraph saying the Australian government is thinking of making the following changes to Centrelink, and explain what they are. And then you would have a question on opinions about it. How long have you worked in healthcare? It is a bit limited. It depends if you're looking at people who have just started working. So, you know, you're looking to interview people who are to get questionnaires and people who have worked, you know, less than 7 years in healthcare, for example, it could be okay. But there is a problem with it over that. Okay, so there is an overlapping answer. So 1 to 2 years and 2 to 5 years are overlapping. Susan got that right before I could even speak. So it should be 1 to 2 years, and the next option should be then 3 to 5 years. So say you've worked in healthcare 2.5 years. Which one do you respond to? Do you tick the 1 to 2 years, or do you tick the 2 to 5 years? So it's got overlapping answers then. Last one. I don't know. I think you can sometimes use social media. It's there for completeness. Social media hasn't been defined. So again, this one actually depends a little bit. Social media hasn't been defined, and that's definitely a problem. But this could be a filter question. So if, say, you are you want a questionnaire and you want people who don't use social media. I know there isn't very many of them around anymore, perhaps, but this could be used as a filter question so that all the people who do use social media say, thank you very much, but we don't actually need your answers for this bit of research. And then the people who don't use social media, or only sometimes use social media, they get asked more questions. So it could just be a filter question. So from that point of view, it might be fine. But if you're asking for it for other reasons, it's probably not a great one for lots of the reasons given. All right, questionnaire layout. This entails things like the order of the question. So what sort of question do you have for your opening question? What are your bulk of your questions? And then where do you put things like sensitive and difficult and complex questions? So your opening question should be relatively straightforward, interesting, simple, non-threatening. You know, it's sort of like it's almost a throwaway one. A lot of opening questions are filter questions because you don't want to waste a respondent's time. You don't want to collect lots of data and then get to the point where you're asking the really important question and the respondent says, oh, I've got no idea. You actually want to take those people out at the very beginning, because otherwise you're collecting data for no reason. The bulk of your questions then go in the middle, or just go next after your opening and filter questions. And they should be in a logical order for the respondent. Okay, not your objectives. Lots of people, when they're writing questionnaires, do it by the objectives they have for the questionnaire, but that's not necessarily logical for the respondent. So you need to rearrange all your questions into a way that's logical to the respondent, and then you can analyze them based on your objectives later. Towards the end of the questionnaire, you ask things like sensitive, difficult, or complex questions. And that's because usually, to an extent, respondents are so far in that they're prepared to answer other questions as well. So they've got into the mode of answering questions. So it gives them some idea. It allows them then to answer those ones. So within marketing, or sales, it's sometimes called foot in the door. So, you know, you've got the foot in the door of people answering questions, so they'll answer other ones as well. You've also got to take into account the effect of previous questions on subsequent questions. And you have to think of the funnel approach, which is used quite a bit when you're doing questioning of patients and stuff as well, that you start off with a very general questions, and then you get, the further you go into it, you get to more specific questions. It's the same with questionnaires. It's using that funnel approach. And with online questionnaires, I've talked about this before, you can use branching, or what's called sometimes skip logic, so that you can, based on previous responses, you can split people into answering different types of questions depending on previous responses. So that's also a way to do it, which is another reason for using online ones. Questionnaire format, it really does need to look professional. Some systems are better than others. If you're doing it as a paper questionnaire, it definitely needs to look professional, because if it doesn't, people will just go, ooh, that looks a bit weird, and I'm not going to answer it. It's always a good idea, if your questionnaire is any sort of length, to divide it up into sections so that the respondents know what they're being asked. So you might start off with general questions, where you put in just simple questions, filter questions, and then your next heading might be demographic information. So, you know, age ranges, where people went to school, I don't know, you know, that's sort of just general information. And then a next section header, that is the next area that you're looking for information. Always a good idea to number your questions sequentially, because that lets the respondents know where they are in the questionnaire. It also helps them that I know I've answered question 3 or whatever, and so they can understand a bit more where they are. Remember again to include instructions in sections, groups of questions, and individual questions. And if possible, and you should think about pre-coding questions. That's where for data input, if you're getting people to input data on your behalf, if it's a lot of questions that, you know, 1 means female, 2 means male, things like that. That's what's meant by pre-coding. If it's been done online, it's all done for you in advance, so you don't really actually have to worry about that, which is another good reason for online questionnaires. It's always a good idea to produce what's called a code book. It also has other names, but I call it a code book. And this is decisions on how data is to be entered and cleaned. So you need to have ideas about, you know, if people put tick the other option and write in what they want in there, because you've allowed them to specify, or maybe you've given them a text box to just a non-structured question to type in some stuff. You need to know what you're going to do with that information before you hand out the questionnaire. So that's part of the code book. You need to know what you need to have, what the variables are, and how they relate to each other, and the answers. And just for information, that whoever is analyzing your data will also be very, very happy to have a code book that has all of this information on the variables and what they mean and why they've been called, what they've been called, and why the answers are the way they are. So it's about all that decision making in the background. Finally, we're back to pre-testing. So if you've sort of skipped or fallen asleep for the last while, after I said pre-testing, yes, please pre-test. You've got to do your drafts. Yeah, have lots and lots of drafts. Ask people, ask random people out on the street if you have to give you some feedback on your questionnaire. Ask the people who are actually going to do the questionnaire. Ask not the people who are actually going to have to fill in the questionnaire, but people similar to them to look at the questionnaire and give you feedback. And then it is sometimes a good idea, or it can definitely be a good idea, to take some people from the population that you want to send the questionnaire to and get them to fill it in as well, so that you have some sort of an idea of the problems with your questionnaire. And last one then up is references, that if you're interested in it, I believe that Bonnie is going to email out the slides to anyone that might be interested, or you can email me at my email on the very front, which I could skip to. And it has also been recorded, that's correct, Francesca. So you can view the recording, or you can ask me questions now if you're doing your own questionnaire. Have you had problems with it, or do you have any questions about questionnaires and questionnaire design?
Hi, Michael.
Yes.
I'm doing up my questionnaires now, and so some of the things that you mentioned, especially with each questionnaire, you have an objective linked to it. That is very helpful, and so I'm trying to just re-listen to your video again, and then refine my questionnaires.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
That's why I'm asking if you are going to be sending us your video version of this presentation.
Yes, it's going to be, according to Bonnie, it's going to be uploaded onto the TAAHC website. So that means it'll be available. And
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you. A question as well is interested in semi-structured interview questions for qualitative research. Yes, this one was very based on quantitative research and very focused on that. One of the reasons for that is that with qualitative research, what you're really doing is looking for that interaction with people where possible. Yes, some qualitative research can be done through semi-structured questionnaires, but it really only makes sense where you can, like the whole theory behind qualitative research is to have that interaction with the interviewer so that you can get that depth of information that's required. So that's why you will see sometimes, especially on websites all over the place, that you can use questionnaires and you can ask both qualitative and quantitative questions. That's actually not really true. It is quantitative, and what they're saying is qualitative is the open-ended questions or unstructured questionnaires are qualitative, and really they're not. They're just unstructured, and usually they get coded anyway in the background. So if you're interested in semi-structured interviews, it really is around having themes that you're looking for and follow-up questions that will prompt people to give more depth to their answers. And thanks to everyone that said thanks for the talk. Happy to oblige. And don't forget to tune in next week, because next week I'm giving a talk on project management and research projects. So some of you may be interested in that. Will I be able to do... thanks, Mara. Will I be able to do a session on validity and reliability? Whoa. I'd have to talk to Bonnie and Rhonda about that. If you're looking at something, if you're looking at research around that requires validity and reliability, it might be a good idea to contact TAAHC and set up a time to talk to me or someone else about that. Anyone else? Everyone is signing off, and that's fine too. It's pretty much the end of the session anyway. It's a minute to 1 o'clock. But thanks for those still around. Thank you very much for attending, and hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Bye.